There is literally no limit to the number of deadly things that a person can legally do. Until such a time as stupidity is outlawed, people will always find new and creative ways to injure, maim, or just kill themselves. But most of these are isolated incidents of a rather unique and creative stupidity rather than larger trends. For example, in most places it wouldn't be illegal to take a selfie with a bear. It's just really stupid. However, such acts of wanton ignorance aren't the sort of things that are going to catch on and become popular pastimes. What, selfie was with bears, Kevin, who wrote today's scripts? I'd give that a shot. I mean, at the zoo when it's behind a cage and then I Photoshop out the bars. So while you undoubtedly could think of things to do that carry a much higher risk of death, today we're going to be focusing on the deadliest things people can do that are actually popular.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sheath Underwear. Quick shout out to them. This is the only underwear that I once you try Sheath, I'm just feeling it now. It's so soft. These are clean. Do not worry. Do not worry. They're so soft. Everything's just nice about them. Once you get some Sheath, gradually you'll just end up replacing, and then you get to, one of those days where you're like, oh no, I've just got these underwear. And it's all of the old underwear that you had before Sheath. And then you just switch over and now everything that I have is Sheath. It's just better. It's perfect in the summer where everything's hot. It keeps you like everything in these nice little compartments that they've put together for your dude parts. And it's just a better way of doing things. It's a dual pouch design, keeps everything separated. The fabric is soft, it is breathable, it is moisture wicking. Basically keeps things cool and dry. They've also got pairs now made with bamboo and mesh. And I've tried those as well. It's all great stuff. Plus, now they're the official underwear of the UFC, which is cool. If that matters to you, I don't think I've ever seen the UFC, but it's nice that they, I've heard of them. It's a big deal. So go to sheath.com/sideprojects and use the code sideprojects for 20% off your order. Just try a pair, you won't regret it. And back to today's video.
Base jumping is an acronym that stands for Buildings, Antennas, Spans, and Earth, with the latter two referring to bridges and cliffs, but doesn't roll off the tongue so easily. The concept of base jumping has existed for hundreds of years, though not originally by that name. It was less of a sport and more just one-off instances of inventors testing out their prototype parachutes with, unfortunately, predictable results. It was the guy who jumped off the Eiffel Tower, back in the day, and it's just like... did not work. Even once parachutes, I don't know why I'm laughing, it's so bad. It just crashes to the ground. Even once parachutes were invented, base jumping didn't take off as a sport or recreational activity for quite a while. Skydiving became popular immediately following World War II, but base jumping didn't catch on for another decade. And even then, it wasn't a recreational activity. Jumping off cliffs or antennas was primarily done as a training exercise to practice low-altitude skydive jumps and occasionally as publicity stunts. That all changed in 1978 when American cinematographer Carl Bonish filmed himself jumping off El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. Badass. He wasn't the first person to make this jump. The first two people to do so injured themselves pretty badly, though. He was just the first person to film himself doing it. More importantly, he was filming it purely as a recreational endeavor rather than as a publicity stunt or part of some sort of training. This was considered the birth of base jumping, a phrase coined by Carl and his wife. He would go on to die 6 years later while base jumping, which wasn't a great start for the sport, but also not very surprising. While base jumping has only grown since then, it's still a pretty niche activity. The target audience for base jumping is people who like the idea of skydiving but don't find it nearly deadly enough. And to be fair, skydiving is actually pretty safe, with only one death in every 220,000 solo jumps and one in every 500,000 tandem jumps. For base jumping, however, that number used to be 1 in every 60. Good lord, 60 jumps, and statistically you should be dead. Holy Part of that was the equipment being used. Originally, people used traditional skydiving equipment, followed by skydiving equipment that was modified for the needs of base jumping. Neither of these was ideal, and safety improved once purpose-built equipment for the sport was made. However, there's still a lot of inherent risk in base jumping. To the surprise of nobody, most obvious is the altitude. Skydivers usually jump out of planes at an altitude of 10,000 feet, providing ample time to open a parachute and then to cut it away and deploy a reserve chute in case of a malfunction. But the average base jump height is only 300 to 1,000 feet, so they don't use reserve chutes. If the first chute fails, there simply isn't time to deploy another before hitting the ground. Another big problem is the people, especially inexperienced base jumpers who may open their chutes too early. When jumping from such a low altitude, there isn't much time to fully deploy the parachute, but opening it before you gain enough horizontal distance can cause a person to get slammed back into whatever it is they're jumping off of. Because these jumps are made off of structures like buildings or cliffs, there's also a lot less margin for error when it comes to landing. People choose where to jump based on the altitude they can get rather than the surrounding terrain, so landing zones for base jumpers tend to be extremely small compared to skydiving drop zones. This makes colliding with obstacles on the way to the ground much more likely. Despite the risks, the safety of base jumping has increased considerably from the 1 in 60 statistic that we mentioned earlier. Exact numbers are difficult to find, but the Kajak Massive in Norway reported a fatality rate of 1 in 2,317 jumps. That's only one specific location, but it does give some baseline at least. Of course, this has all been discussing base jumping with a parachute. There are also wingsuits, a special suit that basically turns a person's body into a glider. Wingsuits are not inherently unsafe, but they allow for forward speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, that's 160 kilometers an hour, or faster, which is much faster than descending with a parachute. This speed provides even less room for error, as reactions and adjustments need to be made extremely quickly. But despite being one of the deadliest and most dangerous things a person can do, base jumping itself is legal in most places and doesn't even require a permit. That said, a person may face related trespassing charges, especially when jumping off of bridges or antennas. Recreational climbing has been popular for nearly 2 centuries, though it has seen an explosion of growth since the 1990s thanks to the abundance of indoor climbing gyms. There are tens of millions of climbers worldwide, though numbers for outdoor rock climbers are harder to pin down. That said, according to surveys, there are over 2 million rock climbers in the United States alone. There are many different ways to climb, most of which use ropes and other climbing safety equipment. These safety measures are obviously important, as mistakes when climbing can have deadly consequences. However, there are 2 ways in which people will often climb unroped. The first is called bouldering. These are free climbs up boulders, usually no more than 6 meters or 20 feet in height. While there are no ropes because of the low elevation, people will often use a spotter and have boulder crash mats in the event of a fall. Bouldering climbs were traditionally designed as puzzles used in training for larger climbs, though it has become popular as a sport in its own right, with some high bouldering challenges approaching double the height that we mentioned. But the use of crash pads and spotters, combined with minimizing the heights of these climbs, makes bouldering generally safe. And that brings us to the other unroped type of climbing, known as free soloing. In free solo, people will climb larger, traditional routes without any climbing or safety equipment. All they are allowed to use are climbing shoes, chalk to improve their grip, and ice tools if they're climbing an icy surface. This is the deadliest form of climbing, and it is not even close. Approximately 30 people die climbing every year, usually from rock climbing, though deaths from falls off indoor walls are not unheard of. Of those 30 deaths, about 10 each year were from people free solo climbing. Now, 10 deaths per year doesn't seem like a lot until you consider just how niche of a sport this is. As we said, there are millions of outdoor rock climbers in the United States alone, so 20 deaths is a tiny percentage. It's a very counterintuitive statistic because of the perceived risk, but rock climbing results in fewer deaths per 100,000 participants than cycling does. That's when all the appropriate safety measures are taken into account, though. Remove all of those safety measures, and you get free solo climbing. Unfortunately, there is little information about how many free solo climbers there are, as it's generally a solitary and unregulated endeavor. We know there aren't that many doing it, just not what the exact number is. Regardless, 10 deaths per year from free solo climbing represents a meaningful percentage of people engaging in the sport. In the minds of many people, death from free solo climbing isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and many of the most famous free solo climbers have already died while climbing or from other extreme sports. Of course, it's not like people are intentionally trying to gamble with their lives when free solo climbing. I don't know, Kevin, I saw that free solo movie with Alex Honnold. He just seemed to be gambling with his life, dude. That was crazy. Great movie, by the way. If you haven't seen it, see it. Climbs are usually done using routes the person has experienced climbing with ropes multiple times, and they aren't climbs that push the absolute limit of their abilities. Even so, nature can be unpredictable. Be it weather or falling rocks, unexpected things can disrupt the best laid plans of even the most seasoned climbers. This is exactly why most experienced climbers still use safety equipment, so that unpredictable events don't send them falling hundreds or even thousands of feet to the ground. God, I hate this. I'm not claustrophobic, but I hate this. Much like rock climbing, scuba diving is another activity with a much higher perceived level of danger than the stats bear out. Incidents of deaths in scuba diving are only 1.8 deaths in every million dives, in no small part thanks to the safety regulations surrounding diving. It's not technically illegal to scuba without a license, but in practice, most locations will require you to either have a diving certificate or be accompanied by a certified instructor in order to go diving. Most recreational divers also don't go to extreme depths. The maximum depth for recreational divers is about 40 meters or 130 feet, and the average recreational diver may only ever go to half that depth. Going any deeper requires additional training and specialized gas mixtures rather than the standard mix of oxygen and nitrogen in most tanks. But beyond your typical recreational diving lies the world of cave diving. This can be done as an extreme sport for the purposes of scientific research or in search and rescue missions like the famous 2018 Thai cave rescue that Elon Musk has a lot of opinions about, and it requires a lot more training. Cave diving is sometimes broken up into different levels depending on the depth at which the dive is occurring, but the general premise is all the same. People dive into underwater caves just to explore and see what's there.
Seems like a bad idea somehow.
But it's that very premise that makes cave diving so dangerous. No matter what you're doing, even if it's something as simple as making a grilled cheese sandwich, things can always go wrong. I'm just trying to work out how it could go wrong with a grilled cheese sandwich. Set my kitchen on fire? How much oil am I using? If things go wrong while you're scuba diving, the usual solution is to immediately resurface, ideally utilizing the backup regulator from another diver's tank. But because cave diving introduces a ceiling to the equation, quickly surfacing in the case of an emergency is no longer an option. At its core, this removal of the emergency exit strategy is what makes cave diving so dangerous. However, the nature of these caves only compounds that danger. Caves are dark and can be full of branching paths, and divers may penetrate thousands of feet into a cave system. This. I'm sorry, but this is a nightmare, not a hobby. Bringing light sources is crucial, but it can still be incredibly easy to get lost or disoriented. This is combated by the use of guidelines that are attached to a fixed, stable object at the entrance of a cave, then strung through the cave throughout the dive so that divers can find their way back to the exit. Now, usually, this works fine, but sometimes guidelines break. This can make it difficult to find the way out, especially with the low visibility and disoriented nature of many caves. I know. A broken line, getting lost or disoriented, and light sources that were either dropped or burnt out can cause divers to panic, which increases air consumption and hinders decision-making. There's also the risk of nitrogen narcosis, which is basically like being drunk, a risk that increases if the cave takes divers deeper than they had originally planned. Of course, even if you're not cave diving, it's always important to plan your dive. Cave diving requires considerably more planning, and with proper planning, these risks can be largely mitigated. Unfortunately, compared to the 1.8 deaths per million scuba dives, in cave diving it's estimated to be 1 death in every 3,300 dives. Most deaths are the result of poor planning or divers without the proper level of experience or training. So even if you have experience as a recreational scuba diver, it would be best to avoid cave diving without getting properly trained in how to do it safely. When you think of dangerous sports, you probably think of things like football, rugby, hockey, or MMA fighting. These are full-contact sports, one of which even has the competitors carrying weapons and wearing blades on their feet. Oh, hockey. It's like, whoa, what's going on with the ice hockey? But when it comes to deadly and dangerous sports, there is no mainstream sport more dangerous than horseback riding. That may come as a surprise, since humans have been riding horses for at least 5,000 years. It doesn't surprise me. I knew this already. And any time my kids, Romulus and Remus, have any interest in horses, I'm like, no horsiness. It's too dangerous. So you'd think that by now, people would have got the hang of it and made it safer. And to an extent, they have. Ignoring the deaths from cavalry who were killed by an opposing military, the historical record is full of descriptions of how dangerous it was to train both cavalry and the horses. They didn't keep the sort of statistics that we do today, but evidence suggests accidental injury or death from horseback riding was at least as common in antiquity as it is today, and it was probably more common. Back then, most horses being ridden were larger and more aggressive animals that had been bred for war. Recreational horseback riding and racing used much more docile horses, but they still do pose a very serious risk. And the more you think about it, the more it makes sense that horseback riding would be deadlier than other sports. The sports we mentioned earlier may be full contact, but they also involve humans working towards a specific goal, such as getting a ball into the end zone. The opposing team may use force to try and prevent this, but there are rules and things like that, so people aren't actually trying to kill one another. Even in MMA, where the fighters are actually trying to hurt one another, there are still rules. Referees who could stop a match, and fighters could tap out if needed. And sure, horse racing and other equestrian sports may also have rules, but it's not like the horses know what those rules are. They may be trained to do what they're expected to, but it's not like they can understand that they're in a competition or what the rules are. They are massive, averaging about 900 to 2,000 pounds or 400 to 900 kilos, depending on the breed, and they can be extremely unpredictable. Some horses are just unpredictable and temperamental by nature, but even the best trained horses can still exhibit unpredictable behavior. No matter how well trained a horse is, at their core, they are still prey animals. This means they have extremely strong flight instincts and can be triggered by any perceived danger, such as loud, unexpected noises. Not only are horses heavy, they're also about 5 feet or 1.5 meters tall on average. That might not sound like too much, but a fall from that height on its own can still cause serious injuries, especially head trauma depending on how you land. However, the biggest danger is not actually the fall itself, it's being trampled by a horse once you've hit the ground. Trampling injuries are the most serious, and they're usually going to lead to either death or permanent injury. Then, of course, there's the kicking. They always say never to walk behind a horse, and with good reason. As we said, horses can be easily startled, and if they are startled by an unexpected presence behind them, then their instinct is to kick. A full-force kick to the torso, or especially the head, is often fatal, as their kicks can shatter bones and crush organs. As for the numbers, 1 in every 10,000 horse riders is killed every year. It may not be the deadliest thing that we talked about today percentage-wise, but with 30 million people riding horses every year in the United States alone, the numbers add up quickly. Beyond just death, there are also tens of thousands of ER admissions in the United States every year from horse-related incidents, with 10 to 30% of all horseback riders being injured every year. And for an individual person's lifetime, 81% of all horse riders will be injured by a horse, with 20% suffering a serious injury. There is no mountain in the world more famous than Mount Everest. Not only is it the highest mountain in the world with an elevation of 8,849 meters, that's over 29,000 feet, or about as high as a plane goes, that commercial one, but is also renowned for how dangerous it is to climb. Though experienced Sherpas can help people ascend to the world's highest peak, it is still a dangerous feat for skilled climbers. As such, there are over 200 unrecovered dead bodies that litter the path up Mount Everest, which is nice. However, Everest is far from the deadliest mountain on Earth. Despite being famous for how difficult a climb it is, the fatality rate for people attempting to climb Mount Everest is only about 1%. That's still incredibly high compared to most things a person is going to do in their life, but it pales in comparison to its fellow Himalayan mountain, Mount Annapurna. Standing at 8,091 meters or 26,000 feet tall, Annapurna is the 10th highest mountain in the world. In 1950, it became the first 8,000er mountains over 8,000 meters tall to be successfully climbed. The French expedition was led by Maurice Herzog, and they reached the summit on the 3rd of June of that year. Of course, while it was the highest summit ever at that point, it wasn't actually the highest climb anyone had made. Climbs of 8,500 meters had been achieved on Everest in the 1920s, even if those climbs fell short of reaching the summit. In 1970, a British expedition led by Chris Bonington became the first to scale Annapurna's south face, which is considered one of the most difficult climbs in the world. The south face, in particular, features extended sections of climbing that are extremely steep and exposed. The average slope is between 50 and 70 degrees, while some sections approach 85 degrees, which is pretty much vertical. While climbing on icy surfaces like that certainly does look really badass when it's done successfully, because the climbing routes are so exposed, they leave people susceptible to the deadliest part of Annapurna, avalanches. The mountain receives heavy snowfall on these incredibly steep slopes, and those conditions make avalanches just an inevitability. While all large snow-covered mountains will experience avalanches, the routes up Annapurna require climbers to spend more time in avalanche zones. The weather is also much more volatile and unpredictable than other 8,000ers because it's located further west in the Himalayas, making it more susceptible to monsoon weather from the Bay of Bengal. These factors combined to give Annapurna a fatality rate of 32%, or nearly 1 in 3 people. Despite being almost a full kilometer higher, over 7,000 people have reached the summit of Mount Everest, while as of 2022, only 365 people have summited Annapurna. Granted, a lot more people tried to climb Everest in the first place, but that still does speak to the dramatically increased danger in climbing Annapurna, not just the fame of Everest. Fortunately, thanks to advances in weather predicting technology and new routes on the north face of the mountain that try to limit time spent in avalanche zones, that fatality rate has dropped considerably. Over the past 2 decades, the fatality rate on Annapurna has fallen to 20%. What a relief! I'm going to climb it this weekend! It's a marked improvement, but most people would still rather avoid activities where your chances of dying are higher than a round of Russian roulette. Thank you for watching.